So I asked to speak on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, and I actually didn't even know what I was going to talk about. Wade had asked me, hey, what are you going to talk about? I said, I don't know. But I feel like what was laid on my heart, like I wouldn't classify this as a sermon or a teaching. I feel like what was laid on my heart is more of an equipping the body to really think about and talk about a big issue in our day, abortion, which is pretty uncomfortable to talk about sometimes. I would just say this, right? If you're uncomfortable talking about it, the act of it should really be uncomfortable. And we have to be able to talk about it specifically and especially in church. In Ohio in November, we just passed Issue 1, which enshrined the right to abortion in our state constitution. Not too long ago, we were considered a pro-life state. And abortion is going to be front and center. It is going to be in every election, every statewide election this year. It's going to be made an issue on ballots. It's going to be made an issue in House of Representatives. It's going to be made an issue in the Senate. And so we have to be equipped to think about and talk about this issue, and we have to not run away from it, and we have to not shy away from it. But before I get started, I have two caveats, all right? So the first caveat is this. And I've got a slide with some scripture here, if we can just throw that up. And if you're running the video, if you could just make sure you put it on camera 3 too, that way if anyone's watching, because I'm not going to read through the scriptures. So if you are sitting here today, you're watching at home, or you're listening or watching this somewhere down the line when it's recorded, if you are a woman who has had an abortion, if you are a man who has coerced a woman to get an abortion, or if you're a man or a woman that has helped, aided, paid for abortion in any way, I want you to know you have forgiveness in Jesus. It is not an unforgivable sin. It is not something that you have to continue to carry the guilt or the shame with for your entire life. It is covered by Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, and you have forgiveness in him. And that is the starting point for us with any conversation about abortion. Also, on the next slide, you don't have to walk through this alone. Okay, at Heartbeats, we have a center in Newark, we have a center in Zanesville, we have in-person and virtual support groups for post-abortive men and women, where you can find healing and you can walk through this with others who have suffered it as well. Okay? So that is caveat 1, forgiveness, grace, and healing. The second caveat is this. When I am up here talking about abortion, or anybody in the pro-life movement or in the context of laws or amendments, we are not talking about miscarriage and we are not talking about stillbirth. All three of these are tragic situations, but they are different. And in the matter of morality and a matter of law, the way a human being dies matters. I'm going to paint a scenario for you. I'm going to have a lot of different scenarios over the course of our time together. A law enforcement officer responds to 2 calls. The houses are side by side. He walks into one door on the left. He walks in. It looks like what is a deceased man who died in his sleep. He fell asleep, died. They do the investigation, and that's exactly what happened. He passed away of natural causes right there in the chair. The second scene doesn't look the same. He walks in. It looks like there's a deceased man, and it looks like he has died from a gunshot wound in the back. They do the investigation, and they found out that's exactly how he died. In the matter of morality and the matter of law, we do not look at these situations the same. So anytime somebody tries to convince you that a pro-life law wants to limit like miscarriage care, wants to limit ectopic pregnancy care, wants to limit stillbirth care, it's a lie meant to deceive you. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the medical procedure that willfully and purposefully ends a living human being's life for no medical reason at all. That is what I am talking about today. Okay? So those are the 2 caveats. Now, in the United States since 1973, there's been an estimated, call it 65 million abortions in this country. Today, on January 21st, 2024, 2,550 babies will die via abortion. In the time that we are here today, there will be about 212 lives lost. And in the time it took me to read you those stats, one baby somewhere's life has been tragically ended inside of its mother's womb. This issue goes deep. Most people Most people who believe that abortion is a right, most people who support it, they don't actually think through the position to the logical conclusion. They don't do what we call in the business world pressure test it. All right, we're going to do some of that pressure testing on some of the common lies today. If you looked on the Planned Parenthood website and you looked at abortion procedures, and look, I'm not going to talk about the specific procedures today, and I'll talk a little bit about it later and what we should know, but I'm not going to talk about the procedures. But if you looked on the Planned Parenthood website, you would see phrases like, take a pregnancy out of the uterus, empty the uterus contents. But what does the language mean? What are we talking about? See, we know that kind reproduces like kind. That's science. A human pregnancy results in a human offspring. We know that there is a human being in the womb. So when we talk about emptying the uterus contents, and you hear that language, you have to say, well, what are we emptying it of? See, the next slide. The basic fundamental question of this entire issue is what's in the womb. We know it's not a cat. We know it's not a dog. We know it's not a clump of cells. Like reproduces like kind. A human pregnancy results in a human offspring. It's a human being. The pro-life position on the next slide is very simple. It's often misconstrued, but we believe that every innocent human being has inherent value and has the right to life. So to us, that is the position. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the euphemisms, we're going to look at some of the catchphrases, we're going to look at some of the common arguments, and I want to just walk through them today. So the first one, we don't know when human life begins. Look, it is a fact. It is a biological fact that human life begins at the moment of conception. It is not an opinion. It is a fact. It is a biological fact. But I'll submit to you this, even if we didn't know, which we do, even if we didn't know, we should proceed with caution. Imagine this scenario. You're driving down the street, poor visibility, it's nighttime, it's foggy, maybe rainy. You see a shadowy figure up in the middle of the road. It looks like it's a kid. However, it could also just be a shadow from a tree. You have no idea. What do you do? Do you step on the gas and just floor right through, or do you slow down and proceed with caution? See, we know when human life begins, but even if you don't, the argument falls apart just right there, because if we don't know, we should proceed with caution. Bundled up in this argument, bundled up in this lie, you're going to hear people, especially specifically in the context of pro-life laws, they're going to say to you, well, if you want to outlaw abortion, then every time a man releases a sperm, right, you need to outlaw that too. You need to outlaw that practice because it's the same thing. Listen. That ignores all science, all right? That ignores everything that we know about science. You see, a body part is defined as sharing the same genetic code. If you cut off my arm and it's laying on the floor, guess what? It is my arm. It will never be anything other than my arm. Why? It's a part of my body. These are my hair follicles. If I pull them out, they're on the floor. They are my hair follicles. They are part of my body. They will never be anything but hair follicles. But when it comes to sperm and egg, at that moment of conception, at that moment of fertilization, sperm is no longer there, egg is no longer there. You have a new, unique, distinct, whole living human being. It is an undeniable fact of science. A new creation has been made. It is distinct. It is not its mother, it is not its father. In the same way, you are not your mother, you are not my father, I am not my mother, I am not my father. It's the same thing. It's unique. There will never be another exact match. Never. Never once. In all the history of humankind, there will never be another exact match. It has all the characteristics of a living organism. And it will go on to self-direct its own development through the entire stage of the human life cycle if given proper time and nutrition. Fetus, infant, toddler, adolescent, teenager, adult. It's just the human life cycle. See, human life doesn't begin at choice. Human life doesn't begin at decision. Human life doesn't begin when you pass through the birth canal. It is an undeniable fact of science that human life begins at the moment of conception. You heard me say fetus on the next slide here. This is another one. It just feeds right in. Another lie. Well, it's not a baby, it's a fetus. There's a real big push. Don't call it a baby. Don't call it a baby. Call it a fetus. We just ask the question, well, what is a fetus? What is a fetus? I'll tell you what a fetus is. In the context of a human pregnancy, a fetus is simply part of the human stage of development. See, it is a fetus. It's a scientific term of exactly what we would expect to find in a human pregnancy at that stage of development. It's not a dirty word. It doesn't mean less than human. It doesn't mean less valuable, right? We just have to ask the logical question. The human life cycle does not begin or change through the birth canal. This is exactly what we would expect. As a 42-year-old man, I used to be a teenager. I used to be a kid. My kids, they love hearing stories about my childhood. They find them hilarious. You know something, though? I didn't come from a teenager. I didn't come from a kid. I didn't come from a baby. I didn't come from a fetus. I was the teenager. I was the kid. I was the baby. I was the fetus. You were the teenager if you're older. You were the fetus. It's you. It has always been you. Always. It could never have been anything but you. Suppose this scenario. What if we found a human fetus on Mars? It would be the most significant discovery in all of human history. Why? We wouldn't just say there's life on Mars. We would say there's human life on Mars. So, logically speaking, why would it be such a significant discovery there, but it's something that can be so easily discarded here? The next one, what you're going to find is people, they concede the science. They realize, you know what, you're right, there's nothing I can say. So they say, all right, it's a fetus, it's part of the human life cycle, but guess what? It's not a person. It's not a person. So let me explain to you what has just happened here. An arbitrary line has been created that cannot be equally applied to all human beings. This generally comes down to four main areas. One is size. They'll say things like, look, have you ever seen a 12-week fetus? It's so small. It's not as big. But since when do we as humans look at others based on their size and determine their value? When do we judge humans based on their looks? When is it acceptable to look at a human and say, you look different than me, so you don't have the same value as me. You're not as big as me, so you don't have the same value as me. You see, an infant is smaller than a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old is smaller than a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old is smaller than an adult. So when does size automatically make you a person? You can't apply it across the entire human race. It's arbitrary. The next is level of development. You'll hear common lies. Well, it's not rational. An infant isn't rational, right? You know, when it comes to development, your brain will actually go on and develop into your 20s, okay? And so an infant is not as developed as a 6-year-old, is not as developed as a 10-year-old, is not as developed as an adult. So at what point does your level of development determine your personhood? We have people among us who have developmental disabilities. Are they less valuable because they're not as developed as you or I? These are the questions. This is the pressure testing we have to ask. All right? The next one is environment. Well, it's in the womb. It's not a person because it's in the womb. So in the womb, out of the womb. If I'm standing down there or I'm standing up here, my location, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't determine my worth. Let me give you a scenario. There are two women. They conceive on the exact same day. The exact same day. All right? 6 months later, this woman over here, she delivers her baby. It's premature. It's small, but it's healthy. This woman is still pregnant. 1 week later, they both decide they don't want the baby. They both take action. One in the privacy of her own home, one in a clinic. We look at one and we say, she's sick. What a heinous crime. She should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We look at the other and we celebrate it as a choice. There is no difference. Inside the womb or outside of the womb does not determine that you are a person. The next one is dependency. You'll hear this. Well, this fetus, it's not a person because it's dependent upon the mother's body. So I want you to, and let me back up. A lot of times you'll hear this also bundled in. It's like a parasite. It's using the woman's body as a host, right? Has anybody ever heard that? So it ignores the fundamental understanding of what a parasite is and the development of the human body. One, a parasite is a foreign object. If a parasite was inside of you right now, your immune system would attack it because that's what your body's designed to do. But a woman's body is designed to create a safe and nurturing space for that womb, and that's exactly what happens because a human pregnancy results in a human offspring, and we would expect to find a human fetus inside of a womb during a human pregnancy. It is not a parasite. Say, well, it's getting nutrition from the woman's body. You're right, it is. And when that baby's born, if that woman breastfeeds, it's going to get nutrition from the woman's body. If she can't or doesn't breastfeed for whatever reason, she's going to have to hold that baby, or the man's going to have to hold that baby. You're going to have to use your hands, still using your body. I'm 42 years old. My kids are 12, 10, and 7. I still have to use my body to go to work, to make income, to provide a shelter, clothing, and food for them. I'm using my body for my kids' dependency. So don't buy this stuff, all right? Don't buy this stuff. And when it comes to personhood, I want you to think about something. Think about human history. In human history, when has it ever gone well for the group declared not persons by the other? See, when one group declares another not persons, slavery happens. When one group declares another not persons, genocide happens. When one group declares another's not persons, holocausts happen. It starts with declaring they're not people. Next one, bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, my body, my choice. That's the catchphrase. Look, I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 beautiful daughters. I believe in women's bodily autonomy. Their bodies should be respected. Their bodies should be protected. But in the context of a pregnancy, I have to ask, is there one body or 2? Let's pressure test it. See, we know that during birth, or even pre-birth, we know that the baby can die and the mother can live. We know vice versa. A woman could die and the baby could live. Both these situations are tragic. But see, if I think through this logically, the math doesn't add up. If I've got 1 living human and 1 dead human, 1 and 1 doesn't equal 1. There are 2 bodies there. We know there's a billboard right now on Maple of an animated pregnant woman. And it says, I don't know the exact verbiage, but it says like syphilis can kill your baby. And the baby's still in the womb. All right. It's right on Maple going towards the mall. All right. We know that a woman who takes illegal drugs or drinks alcohol can damage the fetus, right? Fetal alcohol syndrome, other deformities. We know that. Why do we know that? Because we know there are 2 bodies. When a woman is pregnant, do we say she has 4 eyes? Right? 4 legs, 4 arms, 2 lungs, 2 hearts, 2 brains, 4 hands, 20 fingers. If she's carrying a son, do we say she both simultaneously yet temporarily has both sexual reproductive organs? It's kind of asinine when you think about it like that. Why though? Because we know there are 2 bodies. The last one is a little more tragic and gruesome. I have a website up here. All right. Now, I believe that every single person, whether you support abortion or not, should know the truth and the understanding of what actually happens during these procedures. All right? And if you are watching, these videos are not graphic, they're animated, and they're usually voiced over by an OBGYN. But if you're ever watching a video that's explaining an abortion procedure and they don't show anything in the womb, don't trust it. Okay? Because something's happening there. We know a human pregnancy results in a human offspring. We know that there's a human being in there. All right? So I'm not going to talk about the specific procedures, but I'll talk about what we know. There are times that there are botched or failed abortions. Before I even get into what that looks like, understand this. Now, coming from the corporate world, I have goals, and when I fail my goals, it's usually very simple stuff. But an abortionist, when they fail, the result is a living baby being born. Think about that. That's failure to them. I didn't do my job and this baby was born. That's failure. And what we see, okay? And from failed abortions, we see babies born with missing limbs. We see babies born with crushed skulls. We see babies born with broken cheekbones. We see babies born with burn wounds all over them. Why? Because the abortionist's attempt on their life failed, and it created physical deformities, and it wasn't the mother's arm who was missing. It was that baby who was born. Why? Because there are two bodies there. So this notion of bodily autonomy, we have to ask, how many bodies are there? And is it really a right? Because see, a right is not a right if I'm not willing to extend it to somebody else. If I'm not willing to extend you the same right that I am to me, it's not the same. See, if my bodily autonomy is a right, but I'm not willing to extend it to you, I can just punch you in the face whenever I want, because I can do whatever I want with my body, but you don't get the same right. There are two bodies, okay? The human life in the womb is not a reproductive right. It is a reproductive responsibility. It's a reproductive responsibility, not a right. All right, next one. You'll hear this talked about a lot. Viability. The baby can't survive out of the womb. All right, so I'm going to talk about the concept of viability, surviving on its own. The average American male's lifespan is 73 and a half years. Women actually live longer because men do dumb things. All right, so up here, next slide, we have the human life cycle. I talked about that, right? So that's just the human life cycle. All right, that's it. Like that is the stages of human development. Go to the next slide. So we talk about viability. Right now, it's currently about 22 weeks. 73 and a half times 52 is 3,822. There's actually some leap years in there that I didn't account for, so you actually get a little bit more. But when we draw the line, the big orange circle, that's viability. The little blue line is pre-viability. So we're drawing this arbitrary line at viability. But let me tell you something. Viability right now is only dependent upon the development of the lungs. That's it. Why do we choose the lungs and not the heartbeat, which happens much sooner, or brain waves? How about this? How about the ability to rapidly reproduce your own cells and direct your own self-development? Because that happens at conception. So it's a line meant to confuse. It's arbitrary, okay? And let's talk about this viability and survivability. I'm going to give you another scenario. There's a woman who lives in the country. She lives by herself. She's pregnant. She doesn't have any neighbors. She gives birth alone in her house. She decides she doesn't want the baby. She packs her bag. She leaves the country. Nobody hears the baby crying because there are no neighbors. Nobody's coming to rescue it. There's no cavalry coming. Is that baby viable outside of the womb? It's not going to last very long. Because viability and survivability, it carries on through your life. Infants are not viable. Some 2-year-olds are not viable, right? You put them in different situations, they're not going to be viable. So viability is this arbitrary line. The other thing we got to think about is highly dependent right now upon medical intervention. Right now, 22 weeks, pretty good chance of rate of survival. 500 years ago, 22 weeks wasn't happening. 500 years from now, we might be able to have a human viable at conception. We don't know. So viability is arbitrary, and it cannot be applied equally. All right, next one. I don't personally believe in abortion, but I wouldn't force my beliefs on somebody else. You'll hear this a lot. Issue 1 passed. And what we are finding in the data, a lot of people who say that they are Bible-believing Christians who attend regular worship services weekly helped pass it. And this is one of the culprits. So let's talk about this. The next logical question to ask, and if this is you in here, don't take this as guilt. I want you to think through this, pressure test this. If it's not for you, if you are personally against it, why? Why? See, the reality is we inherently know that something bad is happening. All right? We inherently know. And because it's not for us, we say we don't want to force our beliefs on others, but let's pressure test it. If I stood up here, let me back up. And people say, well, you don't know what a woman's going to go through. Abortion is a hard decision. You can't put yourself in their shoes. These are good points. They don't necessarily support, like abortion should be a hard decision. It should be a very difficult decision. Why? Because we know what's happening. We know what's happening. That's why it's a hard decision. You don't know what a woman's going through. I get that. Okay, but what if I stood up here and I said this? I said, fatherhood is hard. You have no idea what men go through. None. The pressure to provide, the pressure to support, the pressure to lead, all that stress from your work, from your family, all that stress from the culture. You have no idea how hard it is. Now look, me, I would never beat my children for fun to relieve stress. I would never do that. But who am I to force my beliefs on someone else? See, I don't know what that man's going through. It's between him and his kids. It ain't between anybody else. See, if I stood up here and I made that argument, you would question my moral compass. You might call Children Protective Services on me. You might call Zanesville Police Department on me. As well, you should question my moral compass. But see, when we apply this to abortion, we forget all that logic. Also tied in here is this notion you don't want an abortion, don't have one. Right? It just goes back to I won't force my beliefs. That crowd would have fit in well during the slavery days. You don't want a slave, just don't own one. You don't know what it's like to have a farm that big and have to find people to work it. See, you gotta pressure test this stuff. You've got to put it through the logical positions and take it to its logical conclusion. The only good reason to be against abortion is the same reason you shouldn't want anybody else having one. It's the same. If I know what it does, I shouldn't want others to partake in it. The only good reason to be against it is the same reason you shouldn't want somebody to have one. All right, last argument, then I'm going to start getting into a couple other things here. All right, next one. Pro-life people are only pro-birth. They don't care about babies after they're born. I have heard this from pulpits. Not this pulpit, but this has crept in everywhere. So first, let me just take a step back and say this. If I looked at Dan, if you don't know, Dan's a dentist. Dan's son, Brian, is a dentist. Dan's dad was a dentist. His brother was a dentist. His sister was a dentist. Long line of dentists in the Merker clan. If I looked at Dr. Merker and I said, you know what? He's not a real doctor. He only focuses on the mouth. It would be a dumb statement to make, right? So if we're going to sit here and say, well, someone only focuses on birth, listen, it is the preeminent issue. It is the issue of our day. It's the starting point. But casting all that aside, it ignores a lot of other things. One, there are 3,000 pregnancy resource centers in the United States. These pregnancy resource centers are staffed with volunteers and paid staff who dedicate their time, effort, and energy to helping not only pregnant women, but women and men with children and families. See, if you walk into Heartbeats with a 6-month-old and you say, I don't have any money for diapers and I don't have any money for formula, you're going to walk out with diapers and formula, right, Sarah? You walk into a Planned Parenthood with that same 6-month-old and you say, I don't have any money for diapers, I don't have any money for formula. They can't help you. You know why? The only thing they care about is killing your baby before it's born. You tell me who's only concerned about birth. Is it our movement? The logic doesn't add up. It also ignores other factors. There are a lot of people who are pro-life out there, and maybe they don't volunteer at a place like Heartbeats. Maybe they don't financially support a place like Heartbeats. But they do to a place like Christ Table, or after-school programs like Eastside Community Ministry, or a battered women's shelter. They're donating time and money elsewhere while also being pro-life. They might not be up here speaking or marching on Sanctity of Life Human Sunday, but they're pro-life in their heart and with their votes. It ignores all of that. I'll use my family as an example. This is not meant to prop us up in any way, but I'm a 42-year-old white, straight Christian male, married, up here speaking about pro-life issues, and some people would say that because of that I'm not qualified, all right, which is hogwash in and of itself. But if someone's going to say pro-life people are only pro-birth, I'm currently president of the board of directors at Heartbeats. So I donate time to Heartbeats. I used to volunteer counseling young men. Now I serve in a different capacity. We donate financially to Heartbeats. But again, Heartbeat supports preborn and born. We also financially support Compassion, 2 kids from Compassion. We financially support a kid from World Vision. We financially support a ministry in Europe that has a home for developmentally disabled young adult men. We financially support an organization in Asia that builds wells, helps with trafficking. Different times and different seasons, we have supported other institutions that are helping set people free. We have donated or volunteered our time at the Salvation Army to serve meals. So this notion that pro-life people are only pro-birth, it's a lie. What it's meant to do is distract you. It's meant to get everyone going, look, hypocrite, hypocrite, while you're not looking, and over here, abortions are happening. That's all it's meant to do, distract us. Hypocrite, hypocrite, don't look over here. Look at the hypocrites. You got to pressure test this stuff. All right. So where does that all leave us? Listen, I could go for like 4 hours. There's a lot more. I could talk about the hard cases. I could talk about that. I don't have the time. But I would be happy to have these conversations with anyone one-on-one, whatever setting that you want. I promise I might not get as animated as this. I can tone it down. But where are we now? Okay? So even after all of this, right? Even after all of this, if you're like me, I think of myself, I'm rational, I'm a critical thinker, meaning I just like to look at things with a critical eye, with a critical lens, right? I pressure test things. So there are some people who might even acknowledge all this, and they just say, you know what? Doesn't even matter what you say, I still support abortion. They just don't care. And if you're like me, you look at that and you say, how? How can that be? Why? And here's the reality. This is a spiritual battle. I purposefully walked through all of those using only science and logic and reason. Purposefully. But winning the argument through science, logic, and reason isn't enough, because it is a spiritual battle. And the only way to really end it is through spiritual means. You see, we were created in the image of God. Can you throw a few scriptures up here? A few people, Les said it today, Wade said it. We were created in the image of God. We were knit together in the womb. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. The kids are a gift from the Lord. It's all right here in Scripture, right? It's all right here. And what we have to understand is as image bearers, the enemy hates us. There's billions of us walking around in the image of God, and he can't stand it. He hates it. He wants to destroy us. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And oh, by the way, he wants you, the church, to be culpable in it and to sanction it. That's what he wants. And that's what he's getting right now. This is a spiritual battle in nature. You're going to hear people say things like, hey, abortion is not mentioned in the Bible. Go to the next slide, please. You know what? The act of abortion, the medical procedural term abortion, is not mentioned in the Bible. Yes. Child sacrifice is. It's the same thing, church. It's the same thing. Now, we've cleaned it up. We've put it in medical facilities. We've labeled it a choice. But this is what we're doing. Okay? This is it. This is what it is. And on top of it being called out in the Bible in this language, also, we need to understand the Hebrew language. And again, this is specifically now to someone who says abortion is never mentioned in the Bible. The Hebrew language, the word yeled, I don't know if I pronounce that right. I can't do the like Y-E-L-E-D. You can look it up. It's the only word used. The only word used for children, whether they're talking about them in the womb or out of the womb. Why? Because there was no difference. For God's people, there was no difference. So when they say abortion isn't in the Bible, wrong. This is it, and there was no difference. The born and unborn children were not looked at differently. Okay? So, I'm going to wrap this up here. This whole industry, okay? This whole industry is built on lies and deception. It's all built on lies and deception. When you listen to the media, if you really listen, it's subtle. But how do they refer to this? How do they refer to this? It's pro-choice and it's anti-abortion. Think about that. Pro-choice and anti-abortion. If you say, wait a minute, why are you calling me anti-abortion? I'm pro-life. You only care about the choice of abortion. That's all. You only care about abortion. You're just anti-abortion. What are you over here? You are only pro-abortion. But they don't want to own that term. So it's pro-choice, anti-abortion. It's subtle. It's in the media. All right. You'll if you look up Kermit Gosnell, all right, Google it. Actually, use DuckDuckGo because Google doesn't like our movement. All right. Kermit Gosnell, heinous, epitome of evil. If you don't know who he is, I'm not going to explain what he did, but he was the epitome of evil. All right. What he did in Philadelphia abortion clinics was so evil that you can't even talk about it. The media ignored the story until there was such a groundswell of conservative sources and pro-life outlets calling it out, then they gave it just a sliver of time. He's not the only one, by the way. You're not going to hear about him on CNN, though. All right? Built on lies and deception. There have been over 100 studies. 100 studies conducted, peer-reviewed studies conducted on whether there's a link between abortion and an increased risk of breast cancer. 75% of them show a link. Yet when you look on the National Institute of Health or the National Cancer Society's website, supposedly neutral, credible sources, they emphatically and undeniably, there is no link. There is no link. They ignore 75% of the peer-reviewed studies. The studies that they cite, they ignore the critical flaws, like only following women for a few years after their abortion, all in the name of women's health, when really it's all built on lies and deception. On the next slide, you see Jesus tells us, all right, that the enemy is the father of lies. It's his native language. It's the father of lies. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus says he comes that Jesus came to have life, that we would have life and life to the full. They're diametrically opposed. All right? It's all built on lies because it wants us to destroy the image, and it wants us as the spirit carriers to be culpable. Now, let me give you a history lesson, okay? Let me give you a history lesson. Bernard Nathanson, he's kind of like the father of the abortion industry, okay? He was one of the three founders of NARAL, which is one of still the largest political action committee lobbying for abortion rights, like National Abortion Rights Action League, one of the three founders. He oversaw and directed the largest abortion clinic of its day in New York City. He personally conducted 60,000 abortions. That's 2.5 times the size of Zanesville at this man's hands. He eventually went on to become pro-life, and he wrote several books and articles. Let me read you some quotes. We fed the public a line of deceit, dishonesty, a fabrication of statistics and figures. We succeeded in breaking down the laws limiting abortions because the time was right and the news media cooperated. We unashamedly lied, and yet our statements were quoted by the media as though they had been written in law. We fed a line of deceit, of dishonesty, of fabrication of statistics and figures. We coddled, caressed, and stroked the press. Why did I change my mind? Well, to begin with, it was not from a religious conviction. Now, he did go on to eventually become a Christian, but at the time of this writing, he did not. He was not. I am an atheist. In any case, the change of mind began with the realization, the inescapable reality that the fetus, that embryo, is a person and a protectable human life. It's built on lies and deceit. I think I have the Jesus came to give life scripture next. All right, no, this one. So read this scripture with me. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among the brothers. You see, abortion can be tied to every single one of these abominations. God hates this stuff. You should too. Evil can only advance when good people do nothing. Evil can only advance when good people do nothing. And in the church, we are doing a disservice. I'm going to wrap up with this quote. So this is from a book called Answering the Call. The biggest mistake we are making in our local churches today regarding abortion is rightly sensing its destructive power, but then remaining silent to spare people hurt. Gnawing guilt and the whispers of condemnation from the evil one hurts. Tears of regret heal. Godly sorrow is medicinal. Make the cut, and you will be able to affirm just what the Apostle Paul promises will happen when we grieve our sin. And this is from 2 Corinthians now. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. Foresee what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you, but also eagerness to clear yourselves. Evil advances when good people do nothing. I have some of these papers here. We printed out, probably enough for everyone. There's 2 sides. 8 simple ways you can do something and get involved. God needs you in this mission. I don't know if I changed minds and hearts today, but I pray that if you're still sitting on the side that believes in this and thinks it's okay, that someday it will break through. Because God needs us in this mission, and evil only advances when good people do nothing.